You will go with Mr. Chuck, Pastor Chuck, to the children's church, and we'll talk more in the congregation about adults who are afraid and how we can let go of fear, give up fear. A lot of us are probably some of our biggest fears are about them and about taking care of them and providing for them and giving them the kind of love, and not only them, but all children, the kind of love and safety that every child ought to have. In Romans, the 8th chapter, the Apostle Paul says, "For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of sonship." When we cry, "Abba, Father," it's the Spirit himself bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may be glorified with him. Now, it means very little in our society when Paul says that all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God, because we don't know the context. Or that as children of God, we will all be heirs, that is, have the inheritance, all of us. We don't identify with that within the context, because the fact is, Jesus has already been here and lived what he lived and taught what he taught and rose from the dead, and the world has been changed and is continuing to be changed in a positive way that we often miss and fail to appreciate, so we make it less the focus and take away from it. But the fact is, because of Jesus, women are beginning to take for granted the fact that they have authority, that they inherit, that they can be in charge. But in Paul's day, in Jesus' day, that was unheard of. The sons were the ones who inherited the family farm, the estate, whatever it is the father had. Daughters inherited nothing. Daughters were married as soon as possible, 13 if possible, to somebody else, some other man who would take care of them. The Jewish society did better than most, but even in the Jewish society, women were not even allowed to say the blessing at their own meals. They were not seen as the ones who inherited the promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They only inherited it through their fathers and husbands. So when Paul says all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God, that's what he meant. The same thing he meant in Galatians 3 when he said, in Christ there is no male or female. And so he was saying, those who accept the love of God in Jesus Christ, all of us are sons of God and have no reason to fear anymore. No reason to fear. No reason to fear anymore. And we know that we are sons and children of God when we cry, Abba, Father. And of course, that's reference to the prayer of Jesus in Gethsemane. That is, when we surrender our will to the will of God in Jesus Christ, in that moment we know that we are sons, that we are children of God, and have no reason to fear, no reason to fall back into slavery, as those who have no hope, because we are children. And we're heirs of God, joint heirs with Jesus Christ. He says, provided we suffer with him in order that we may be glorified with him. That is, provided we keep the attitude that Jesus had in the Garden of Gethsemane when he had endured that incredible suffering and prayed, Father, Abba, Father, if it be possible, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. When we suffer with him like that, when we maintain humility that causes us to want to give ourselves away because of the love of God, so that every child, the child in Haiti or wherever, is just as important as my child or my grandchild. That's the attitude Jesus had, was it not? Even for his enemies. That's what a son of God, a daughter of God, does. And in that there's no fear. When you surrender your will to the will of God, in that moment there is no fear. There once was a man born in 1925 who had every reason to be afraid. His father was a ship captain, merchant. And when he was just a boy, he went on 6 different voyages with his father, trained in the way of the sea. But he didn't pay much to the religion of his mother. Actually, she died when he was still a child. She did try to teach him some basics, but 5, 6, 7 years old, and that was pretty much it. But he learned the way of the sea, the roughest way probably to live in those days. And his father died, and this young man was conscripted or pressed into service, or in this country we used to call it drafted, in the British Navy, and was taken to sea on a man of war. And the conditions were such, they were so horrendous and so unfair that he began rebelling against them. Every order he tried to rebel against. Everything that he was told to do, he would do the opposite. He was raging against the conditions on the ship. He used every kind of way that he possibly could to act destructively, and of course continued to get all kinds of feedback because of that. He went AOL, you might say, AWOL. AOL is the other thing. He ran away. They brought him back and flogged him, beat him unmercifully, stripped him of his rank, and made his condition worse and worse and worse. So he, after 4 or 5 years, managed to get himself transferred to another ship, not to a warship, but to a slave ship. And serving on the slave ship, he was beaten like he was a slave. He was abused just like he was a slave. That went on for the longest time until he was finally able to take over a ship for himself, become the one who was the captain of the ship, buying and selling slaves. And during one of those oceanic crossings, his ship was in an incredible storm. And the storm overwhelmed him. He was steering the ship, and not knowing even hardly where it came from, he cried out, "Oh God, have mercy on us." And somehow his life was spared, and that changed him forever.